So I want to talk to you today about the key findings and recommendations from the report that we've been working on. In January 2018, the government published its 25-year environment plan, which we, like many others, read through and welcomed because we felt that it raised the ambition around the environment and raised the environment up the political agenda. We've since been following the progress, and we've also seen the first progress report come out, which covered January 2018 to March 2019. In that report, they stated, in the first year alone, 90% of the plan's actions have been delivered or are being progressed. And whilst we have seen a lot of action on particularly planning and developing some legislation, which is absolutely necessary, we've seen limited focus on delivery. So we decided to write a report looking at what was happening on the ground at the moment. For our report, we looked through the 25-year environment plan and found a plethora of targets that require local action rather than legislation. We looked at who's involved in delivery at the moment, including many government and also non-government organisations, how those organisations and bodies might work a bit better together, and we produced a set of 6 recommendations. So there are an awful lot of bodies involved for delivering for the environment, and we didn't look at all of them, but we did look at quite a few. We looked at a good mix of government and non-government bodies and made sure that we looked at those that were specifically mentioned in the 25-year environment plan. For each of the bodies we looked at remit, structure, current delivery, funding, and their potential to meet 25-year environment plan targets. That's quite a long section in the report, so I suggest that when it comes out you treat that more as a reference section and pick a few bodies that you're particularly interested in, and then read the summary table at the end, which looks at what's going on for current delivery overall, before we move on to discussing barriers, which I'll talk about now. During our research, we found a number of common barriers that were kind of cropping up in the research we were doing on several different bodies. So, firstly, not all bodies or organisations have their objectives aligned with the 25-year environment plan. For this, we saw actually quite a strong government-non-government split. Government bodies were particularly involved in drafting the plan, and so that was already being reflected in their objectives and their delivery plans, whereas non-government bodies, this wasn't being reflected so much yet in the printed material that they had available. We found overall that there was a lack of strategic oversight and coordination between the bodies. Now, whilst there are some really great examples of partnership working at a large scale, for example, the Natural Course project looking at implementation of the Water Framework Directive in the northwest of England, mostly we found that projects were locally focused. And the result of that was a lack of systematic collaboration across whole systems. The benefits of improving collaboration would be improving collective ability, innovation, strategic planning, integrating delivery against shared aims, avoiding competition for funding, and avoiding duplication of projects with similar outcomes through collaborating better. Funding constraints were noted as an issue for most organisations, which will come as no surprise to many of you in the room, particularly the fact that funding was uncertain as well as insufficient. Delivery bodies need reasonable funding to be secured over a multi-annual period to allow them to operate reliably against well-planned strategies, achieving wider fundraising and acting on partnership opportunities. We found a lack of accountability through insufficient reporting. There was, in fact, a great variety of reporting out there from the different bodies. Some were really, really good, but many were not as good. And there was quite a distinct split between the national level of reporting and the local level of reporting. The problem with poor reporting is that it makes it hard to assess the funding that's needed for the organisations and also to record the delivery benefits that they're providing. It also impacts on bodies' abilities to identify collaboration opportunities, improve their working, and justify the funding that they're asking for. We noticed that in a lot of cases, particularly with the more voluntary organisations, that there were human capacity constraints, which led to too much pressure being placed on individuals for delivery. We also noticed that there are a few skills gaps, for example, around natural capital accounting, data collection and analysis, and natural flood management, which varied between the bodies. The final clear barrier that we saw were misaligned boundaries. The delivery landscape has developed organically over a long period of time, and the boundaries that each organisation has were set to suit their individual remits. As a result, there is a lot of overlapping boundaries which don't complement. This can make it harder to collaborate. However, in many cases, those boundaries remain appropriate for the remits of the organisations, and so there's limited scope for reviewing them. We thought that lack of oversight and misaligning boundaries might be addressed through improving collaboration. So we looked at ways to improve the functioning of delivery bodies as a whole. We saw broadly three options: a kind of do-nothing option, which we felt was not an option given the climate and ecological emergencies we're facing, a kind of tweak the system option, or alternatively a complete overhaul. And again, we felt an overhaul was not really an option, or was at least an unattractive option, because it would lose the social capital that voluntary organisations have spent a long time building, and it would also delay delivery. So in looking at kind of tweaking the existing system, we looked at three frameworks that professionals suggested to us, including Ashley. Overall, we came up with a list of success criteria that any framework adopted might need to include. These are on the screen now, and they include support dialogue, engage financiers, funding transparency, reporting and enforcement. If a framework's route is pursued, which we think it should be, more research will be needed, alongside those involved in actually delivering, so that something helpful can be developed. Based on our findings on the barriers and also on our frameworks research, we developed 6 recommendations. Delivery organisations should be required to review their objectives and work towards the 25-year Environment Plan goals. This is not a problem for all organisations, and there's particularly that government-non-government split that we talked about earlier, but overall this is needed to raise awareness amongst staff and volunteers of the importance and relevance of the 25-year Environment Plan and provide legitimacy for groups to pursue the targets of the plan and bid for funding on that basis. Secondly, collaborative partnership working should be facilitated through improved strategic planning and governance. This links back to the frameworks discussion, and we feel that more research on how to do that is needed, including whether it might be appropriate to introduce a support framework, and if so, designing that with the users. Annual reporting needs to be required, locally, regionally and nationally. Organisations and their national support structures should be required to report annually on their finances, their delivery and their future delivery plans. This will better provide transparency, allowing organisations to identify opportunities for collaboration, and will also facilitate accountability. Delivery organisations should be supported in developing the skills they need to develop the 25-year Environment Plan. Within our research, we saw that this may include data collection and analysis and natural capital accounting. The government funding of organisations needs to be reviewed. We feel that it's essential that governments commit to providing enough base funding over the long term to support organisations' capacity to meet their planning, external fundraising and administrative requirements. Realistically, the achievement of the government's increased ambitions for the environment will need to see a corresponding reversal of the extensive cuts that have been felt particularly acutely in the environment sector. Finally, innovative funding routes also need to be developed. To achieve the ambition of the 25-year Environment Plan, there needs to be a mix of both public and private financing. More concerted implementation of the polluter pays principle and natural capital accounting are important steps in encouraging the growth of private funding. Further research and development of where and how these can most effectively be targeted is encouraged. To summarise, the 25-year Environment Plan has good ambition, which is needed given the climate and particularly the ecological crisis that we face. But it must now be delivered. We think our recommendations could improve the delivery efficiency and will be urging government to consider them. The full report will be available through our website soon, and we'll be sharing a link with you via email. I now look forward to hearing from Ashley and Lawrence and to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sarah.